Okay, welcome. I'm going to talk briefly through this idea of mentalizing so that we get an idea that when we use the word, roughly the same idea pops up in your mind as is in our mind. I'm going to cover what mentalizing is. It's an activity that my brain gets into, but it's actually also a state that my mind gets into, and it gets into other states too. Where it comes from, well, it obviously comes from my brain, but it comes from my brain when it's had the luck of being in relationships where there are trust, and I'll say something about that. And why does it matter? Well, for us, AMBIT is absolutely the kind of the centre, it's what carries the load for all of AMBIT. But in more general terms, mentalizing is exactly what it is that makes humans human. So, here's a brain, and we can see that there are lots of different parts of the brain that do slightly different things and develop at slightly different times. Very young babies, right deep in the brain, these red parts, have a part of the brain that can react to threats and stress with emotion that drives them into action. As they get older, towards the top end of primary school, early secondary school, they start to develop another part of the brain that can notice when people are doing things that are a little bit different from how they'd expected. We call this the detection node out here. And if they notice something's out of the ordinary, a little bit not cool, like a dad with his teenage child who starts to try and dance, or worse, that triggers this activity, and the only thing that might stop it is the frontal part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex. But for the poor adolescent, and many of us in sort of even older adulthood, this part of the brain is quieter, it's softer, it's in the way that it speaks, and it certainly doesn't mature until early adulthood. So it's a little bit like for the adolescents, they've got a powerful engine, that emotional centre, the red part, they've got an accelerator pedal, the green part, the detection node, but the brake pedal, the part that would help them stop, slow down, kind of weigh up, hesitate, think things through, is easily overwhelmed and eclipsed by these action centres. So, mentalizing is kind of what happens in the frontal part. That's what we're talking about. It's an imaginative activity of my brain. It's not a knowing and a certainty. It has that kind of quality of thinking, of wondering. It takes place when I'm trying to make sense of behaviour, either to make sense of your behaviour, or if I'm looking in a mirror, to make sense of my own behaviour. Why did I say that? Why did I do it like that and not like this? And I do that by assuming that the person doing the behaviour is mental. And what I mean by that is, of course, that they have a mind, because that's what mental means. If you're not mental, you're mindless. As I wonder about what's going on in that mind, I'm thinking about this person who will have beliefs about the world that may be correct or incorrect, but the beliefs are theirs. They might have hopes, they might have fears, they have intentions. So what does mentalizing actually look like when somebody's busy doing it? Well, we don't have the luxury of looking at their brain and seeing this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, getting active. But we can get some ideas about what they look like. Now here's a dog, and dogs are quite good mentalizers, probably the highest mentalizers apart from humans. And I think this is a good example of a kind of mentalizing expression. Curiosity. That's what people look like when they're mentalizing. They're kind of figuring stuff out. People who are mentalizing don't assume to know. They actually assume that they don't know, but they're kind of valuing trying to make more sense of what might be in the mind of the person they're trying to make sense of. People who are mentalizing might be curious about you, but they could also be curious about themselves, because it's the same part of the brain that we use to make sense of why I do crazy things or why you do things that might make less sense to me than could do. People who are mentalizing are aware that emotion has an effect on the way that we think in this way, that it's more difficult to think when I'm hot and bothered and upset. And people who are mentalizing are good at kind of creating stories that make some sense, that are kind of coherent, if you like. And the final thing, which is probably the most fun bit about mentalizing, that people who are mentalizing can demonstrate humour, particularly a kind of self-deprecating, making fun of the comedy of my own errors, because we're not good at making sense of each other. That's the human condition. So, assuming I've got a brain, it just grows and so I can mentalize. Well, no, it's not quite as simple as that. We know that mentalizing develops by being mentalized by somebody else, particularly a parent or a carer. Now, there's some text here that people can read if they want, but the long and the short of it is that the mother creates a picture, an imagined picture in her mind of what she thinks might be in the baby's mind. And she can't help but show that back in her expression. Here's a mother whose eyelids are raised in a kind of curious, inquisitive excitement, and it absolutely mirrors her child's mind, if you like. And the child keeps seeing the mother, or seeing the mother, but seeing their own mind kind of reflected in the mother's mind. And that's how they start to learn what they look like when they're curious, or when they're a little bit unnerved, or when they're angry, and the mother will show them these expressions back, hopefully in benign and compassionate ways. So the other thing I want you to know is that mentalizing is fragile. We've developed this function in our mind, but it's not there all the time. It comes and it goes, minute by minute often. As long as I'm calm, I can mentalize. But if there's a threat, my mentalizing is very quickly shut off, and those red bits in the heart of my brain that do threat and arousal, they switch on. And of course that's helpful. It's not of any survival value to me if I mentalize this tiger. I need to be certain that this tiger's dangerous, probably means to harm me, and I need to get on and run away, rather than spend any time wondering about what it might be like in his tigery mind. So mentalizing is fragile in our clients. But here's the thing, mentalizing is almost just as fragile in us, the workers. And that's one of the things that AMBIT is particularly keen on. And when mentalizing collapses and we lose our balance, it's a little bit like those toys, Weebles, that wobble but they don't fall down. Mentalizing is what pulls us back into balance. But when we are falling off, it's useful to know that we can fall off in really three ways. And I find these very useful when I'm working with a young person or a family, just to help me kind of work out how things have come apart. The fragility shows itself when somebody collapses into certainty. This guy knows, doesn't have a theory about me, knows what's wrong with me and why I'm an idiot and dangerous. We can also collapse into quick fix thinking, a kind of solving my anxiety or my worry with action. For the young people, clients we work with, that might be that they're injuring themselves. It'll feel better when I see blood, when I feel the pain, or when I've drunk a bottle of vodka or smoked a spliff. But we as workers can get into action. It'll feel better when this young person is in hospital. It'll feel better when we've excluded this young person from school. And of course, sometimes those are the right things to do, but actually we can sometimes collapse too quickly into those quick fix solutions, where a little bit more reflection could have found less harmful ways of dealing with our anxiety. And then the final way that we can fall off our mentalizing is through the pretend mode, which is where I get to in this part of the talk as I just wrap things up, where mentalizing gets lost in a kind of love of the words and of the story. And even though what I'm saying may be true, it may not connect to you who are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit bored, a little bit frustrated, and I keep going on and I'm waffling. So mentalizing collapses into certainty, action, or waffle. And we get it back again when we calm things down. And later in this show, in videos, we'll show you how AMBIT makes use of those ideas in more general ways than just what you do with the clients you work with, but in terms of how you work with your team, how your team works with networks, and how your team, if you like, as much as one a collection of minds can mentalizes itself. Why do we work in this way and not in that way? And that's what AMBIT is about. But that's really mentalizing in a nutshell. Thank you.